Talking Gophers here at the Voice of College Football, post-National Signing Day. We got Tony Liebert on the line from Gopher Hole and also Minnesota Daily News. Tony, we appreciate you stopping by.
I appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. So PJ Fleck, certainly well entrenched at this point, becoming a dean of coaches to a certain extent behind Kirk Ferentz in the Big Ten Western Division with all the coaching shakeups elsewhere. Pat Fitzgerald, we know, folks. Don't call me out on that in the comment section. We know the running time for everybody involved, but becoming more, obviously, of a veteran coach there at Minnesota. 40th ranked recruiting class. This would be, I guess, among the better programs in the country considered a developmental program at the same time, 40th ranked. Your thoughts overall?
Yeah, so the class really started with a theme of getting a lot of in-state talent, keeping it home. They started pretty early, getting a lot of commitments from in-state players. And then the top player in-state, Jackson Howard, who's a defensive end, high-level four-star guy. There was some hope that the Gophers were going to get a commitment for him, but he decided to go to the SEC and commit to LSU. So that kind of, I guess, stopped the momentum that it was going to be like a historic class for the Gophers. But it's still, I think, one of PJ Fleck's best because he did get a lot of I think it was one of his deeper classes, a lot of talent, especially on the offensive side of the ball, kind of headlined by the running back and wide receiver positions. I think they signed 2 running backs and 3 wide receivers that can contribute, I think, pretty early in the Big Ten. And then at the top, I'm in Minnesota, Williams, the player that the Gophers signed, who was probably the best player in Minnesota last season. I think he can contribute really early. Greg Johnson is also a very good offensive lineman. And then, like I said, you got some running backs and wide receivers at the top of that list. So it's really headlined by Minnesota talent and offensive talent.
Tony Liebert on the line, Gopher Hole and Minnesota Daily News. Jump on over there, check out Tony's work covering the Gophers. 8-4 here in 2022 with a bowl date against Syracuse. Tony, anybody on down the list that maybe, even though they're not highly regarded, a bit under the radar, that you like, just based on your own observation, looking at the huddle tapes, getting scouting reports and so forth?
One of my favorite players in the class is Zaquan Bryan, who is a cornerback from Savannah, Georgia. He's still up top on that list, but he's the classic high school football player that played all over the field. Very productive wide receiver in Savannah. He also is one of the best cornerbacks in the state, obviously. I know his high school team went deep in the state tournament back-to-back years, which is always something that I think is very impressive for a high school prospect. And I think he's one of the better players in this class. And then if you go down even further, they did sign a quarterback from Walnut Lake, Michigan, Drew Vioto, who is a very underrated player. Like you see there, his national rank's not even on the list, but very, very talented, supreme arm talent. He didn't put up any gaudy numbers or anything, but I had the chance to interview him in the offseason, and it's just a very, very smart guy. He knows football. He's worked with the same quarterback coach for a while. Originally from Canada, and then he moved to Michigan for high school football. I think he's a guy who could develop really quickly and see some snaps at quarterback in the Big Ten.
To your point, of course, the recruiting rankings are important. They're meaningful, but they're not everything. There are misses all over the place and misevaluations and just other things that weigh into the ranking than just the sheer football evaluation. So there will be plenty of players that will jump up the board and be more impactful than other guys, certainly for every team in the country. It's no different. You got Tony Liebert on the line. Gopher Hole, Minnesota Daily News. Head on over there. You see the Twitter handles. Check out what Tony's got going on. Tony, about PJ Fleck's approach and success in recruiting. I don't think there's any question. If we went back, I don't have the numbers in my head, but he immediately improved recruiting, just like he did at Western Michigan. They had the top recruiting classes in the MAC his last 2 years. Immediately brought it from somewhere in the 60s to the 30s and 40s for his tenure here at Minnesota. Do you think he's got it to a landing spot, that there's a ceiling there? Or do you think that there's always room for improvement, of course, but it's substantial improvement?
Yeah, like I kind of mentioned earlier, this was a cycle that he had the chance to take that next step with adding Jackson Howard, a player that went to LSU that had 30 plus Power 5 offers, and he was NFL talent. And he really hasn't been able to get that level of player. Jackson Howard from Minnesota, and he listed the Gophers in his Final Four choices. I don't know if that was out of, I guess, respect, or the Gophers realistically had a shot. Everything that I heard is he was strongly considering them. But yeah, PJ Fleck, from an outsider's perspective, he's this big personality that is a player's coach, and you think that players would want to come play for him. And classes ranked in the 35 to 45 range might be an improvement over the past. It still is ultimately on a national scale pretty slightly above average to mediocre recruiting classes. But I think what PJ Fleck's done really good is getting guys that fit his system. Because I've agreed kind of with what you said, that rankings don't really matter much at the end of the day. And when you are a program like Minnesota, I think it's more important to get guys that you know will be bought in. PJ Fleck does have I think, a very polarizing culture. It's not for some guys. Some guys don't like the all the sayings and all the row the boat. Some people just want to get down to football, and other guys need that. They need the motivation. They need the public speaker almost as a head coach, and getting guys that know that, I think, is really important. And I think PJ Fleck got a lot of guys that know that, and that I think are going to buy in, and that are talented players that he can develop. He's shown the ability to do that while being a head coach. And I think this is kind of a PJ Fleck class. I think he's going to stay in that 30 to 40 range for a while.
I just assume that Minnesota fans are ecstatic about PJ Fleck just because there's the obvious upgrade in winning. But to a point, he, of course, had the tremendous 2019 season of 11 wins and a top 10 finish. And he's landed in this 8-4 area to a certain extent. And he's been one win away from closing the deal a number of times to get to a Big Ten championship game, but that hasn't happened yet. Again, the overall assessment would be that he's been successful, upgraded the program, and I would think Minnesota fans would be happy about that. But what is your take, because you interact with a lot more Gopher fans than I do, in regards to where they stand on PJ?
Kind of like I said earlier, he's a really polarizing guy. I think there's always going to be people that are 100% bought in and think that they might even be bought in a little too far and think PJ can do no wrong. And then there are going to be people that doubt him because some people don't buy into his whole persona. And like you mentioned, I think most level-headed Gophers fans realize that the program is in a consistent place that it really hasn't been in like 50 years almost. Like pre BCS and pre everything in the early 1900s, Minnesota was one of the best programs in the country and was winning national championships, and haven't won a Big Ten title since 1960. One of the only programs not to play in the Big Ten championship. And PJ Fleck's knocking on that door, and it's just finding, I guess, the middle ground where being a realistic fan and realizing that 8 wins is good for a program like Minnesota that hasn't been able to reach that level in so many years, while still saying this last year, especially when the Big Ten West was really down and it kind of seemed like a revolving door at the top of the standings, that it was a really the chance was there for this team to get to Indianapolis, and losing to Iowa for the sixth straight year under PJ Fleck, falling to Purdue, very winnable game, losing on the road to Illinois, losing on the road to Penn State. Those were all games that they had, and playing 12 games and being favored in all but 2 of them and going 8-4 is, you have to realize that it can be disappointing, but winning 8 games and beating your rival Wisconsin for the second straight year, something they haven't done in 20 years, it can still be impressive. So it just, from an outsider's perspective, there's always people on both ends. But I think you kind of have to realize that he has the program trending in the right direction.
If the team's winning, and I mean winning big, then no one has, or no one reasonable has any objections to what's going on. But despite the success, when there are missed opportunities, then there is the next question. Okay, what could have been done differently? Where are we missing it? Where are we weak? What's not happening? And when I look at this Minnesota team, I would have thought that 2019 would have blown everybody away in regards to not just the winning, but the style of winning on offense. Dynamic passing. Kirk Sherrock is there. Tanner Morgan throws for 30 touchdowns. It's like, we got these NFL receivers. Wow, look at this. Look at what can be done. And then after that, not because PJ Fleck, I think, wants it to be this way, but he figured based on the personnel and what they had after that, hey, we've got to lock it down and win 17-14 games. And that's pretty much what the offense has been ever since. Sherrocka comes back. I was expecting maybe not what they had in 2019 because of not having Bateman and Johnson and those guys, but something more improved in the passing game, and it just wasn't there.
That's really the number one gripe that I think fans have, is in the Big Ten, you can kind of get into that routine, I think, especially in the Big Ten West, where teams like Illinois, like Iowa, like Wisconsin, they just all kind of play the same style. And while the Gophers do have had one of the best defenses in the country the past few years under Joe Rossi, who I think's only a few seasons away from becoming a head coach at the FBS level, it's just, I don't know necessarily why they feel the need to play at Iowa or Illinois' level offensively when the Gophers have the talent, especially at the wide receiver position. I think it's a position that PJ Fleck has really recruited very well since he's came to Minnesota. And it really comes down to the quarterback position. Coming into the year, a lot of people were down on Tanner Morgan. He had 2 disappointing years after that 2019 season. And then the idea of him reuniting with Kirk Sherrocka to get to that 2019 level gave Gophers fans a lot of hope. But a lot of Gophers fans also know Ethan Kaliakmanis, who replaced Tanner at the end of the year. It kind of came from injury. So I don't know necessarily if PJ Fleck would have made that move if Tanner wasn't dealing with injuries, but he kind of gives another level to this offense, a running option at the quarterback position, quarterback simply that has a much higher ceiling and can make throws that Tanner wasn't able to. So it's, even now the Gophers added 2 wide receivers from the transfer portal, 3 incoming in the class. In the last week, they flipped 2 of those high school recruits with Kenrick Lanier and TJ McWilliams. And then they brought in Elijah Spencer, who's a Charlotte transfer, almost had 1,000 yards last year on one of the worst teams in FBS. So very talented player. And then Corey Crooms, who probably is going to roll into the slot position, who's also a guy who I think can contribute at the Big Ten level. So with Mo Ibrahim graduating, a player that the Gophers have built around offensively, and then changing their attack with personnel, attacking these wide receivers, I think there's a chance the Gophers open the door for Ethan Kaliakmanis to build around him and become this more passing offense. That's an optimistic, I guess, view to take, but it's really just becoming more dynamic because they're kind of just fitting the past few years. They've just fit into this Big Ten West mold of just being grinded out. And when you play that style of football, your margin for error is just so small, and they just haven't been getting the bounces in these big games. And I think that's what's been costing.
We could debate and argue. I don't know where you stand on bowl games and the importance of bowl games, but at this point in the year, college football fans love that debate in regards to, okay, what is this meaningful? And we can go all over the place. What I don't think can be argued is that they're different. They're different than regular season games. So looking at the Syracuse game, Pinstripe Bowl, fortunately, they're not playing this weekend in New York City. It might be 10 or 20 or 30 degrees warmer, possibly in a few days. I think that's pretty much going to be the forecast. So I'm sure they're thankful for that. But it's Minnesota at Syracuse at the Pinstripe Bowl. And this, again, another underlying narrative is this pretty much where Minnesota stands in terms of bowl play for the most part and the type bowl games they get to. But what type of importance do you put in the game, getting a win versus development and growth? And what are you looking to achieve? And what would you like to see against the Orange?
PJ Fleck especially, I think, takes bowl games really seriously. He's 3-0 with the Gophers in bowl games. So I think, at least from the Gophers' perspective, they're a program that takes bowl games seriously as an opportunity to develop players and even in the past years develop coaches, because they've had a lot of turnover sometimes with play calling from regular season to bowl games. This year's not one of those times, so it'll be interesting to see how they play in a bowl game with the same with relatively the same coaching staff. I know their running backs coach took the head coaching job at Kent State, but yeah, I think I'm personally a fan of bowl games. I think they're a celebration to the year. Even the bowls like the Pinstripe Bowl and the Boca Raton Bowl and all these bowls before New Year's week. Even though the Gophers are playing around New Year's, I think they're important, and they give. The biggest thing is giving the players more time to practice together and kind of extending their season. And you get that week or two off from the 12-week grind of the year to take a step back and kind of re-heal. And everyone's dealing with injuries, and I think a lot of Gophers fans, especially though, are mad when they play in a bowl game like in New York, because in Minnesota in the frozen tundra, people want to go play in Florida in the Outback Bowl like we had a few years ago, or play in a coastal state. So the fans, I guess, weren't real happy with this bowl being in New York. Second straight year that they're playing in a baseball stadium too, which is last year they dealt with a handful of injuries in Arizona in the Diamondback Stadium at the Guaranteed Rate Bowl. So hopefully they don't have that again. But the players that I've talked with, they're really, I guess, excited to go to New York in December. It's a fun game, a fun place to be, and not everyone's been to New York. And I think stuff like that is the things that fans don't realize. And then you get to play a football game too. It kind of brings back almost that travel basketball feel of you're going to these cities and you get to hang out with your friends, and it's almost it's different, obviously, than the grind of the Big Ten West. And you're not playing in West Lafayette, Indiana. You're playing in New York City in Yankee Stadium. It's a pretty cool experience. But I guess as for the game, Syracuse is in an interesting spot that both their offensive and defensive coordinators have taken different jobs. Probably their best player, running back Sean Tucker, has already declared for the draft. Syracuse was top 20 team early in the year, and now they've, I think, lost 5 out of 6 games maybe, and they're struggling. But the game's in New York. They're still a talented team, and Dino Baber has always been a good head coach and has his team playing at a high level. So it should be an interesting game. I know the Gophers are almost double-digit favorites now, but I think it'll be a good opportunity for the Gophers to get that extra week of practice. And even though they played in the Outback Bowl a few years ago, this is kind of the range I think they're going to be in until they break that seal of the Big Ten West. It's going to be the Pinstripe Bowl, the Mayo Bowl, the Outback Bowl might be the ceiling, to be honest, but it's really up to Coach Fleck to decide. And I think with this new philosophy on offense next season, with maybe some more pass catching and more wide receivers and spreading it out, I think there's a chance they do break that ceiling. But as Gopher fans, I think are happy ultimately with playing in bowl games like this.
Tony Liebert, Gopher Hole, Minnesota Daily News. Check out Tony's work. Tony, we appreciate you stopping by, breaking down Minnesota football for us.
Yeah, and thanks for having me.